Gotta make it to the top of this hill. It's not gonna do it. All right, well, we're pulling over on a real cliff now. How would you like to drive a brand new 1967 Shelby GT350 up America's mountain? We got to do it 4 times while we were troubleshooting a customer's brand new Revology Restomod. Normally in this course of business, we get a call from a customer and they say, hey, my car is having an issue. Most of the time, we don't get to witness it. In this case, we were actually there when the car very first had its problems. So this was back in June, and it was during the Colorado Shelby Rally, which is an event that we've sponsored for the last few years. It's pretty chill. We're just hanging out with the other car enthusiasts, enjoying the beautiful scenery and the awesome roads here in Colorado, and then providing occasional roadside support. So in this case, it was a customer's 1967 Shelby GT350 Restomod. It was built by a company called Revology. They're out of Florida. The customer received this car earlier in the year and had already driven it like 3,000 miles before the Shelby Rally. So everything seemed to be going really well. This was going to be the first time the customer took the car over a mountain pass. The group woke up, we had our driver's meeting, we hit the road, everything's going great. We were getting some awesome footage of the 67 driving through the mountain pass. Awesome background, awesome scenery. And then I checked the rearview mirror and the car is pulling over with the hazard lights on. So we stop and we backed up to them. I get out, trying to figure out what's going on, something I can maybe fix. This is the 67 and it just died. The customer says the car's just losing power, just doesn't have power to get up over the mountain. This was the first issue the customer had ever had with this Revology car. So all those thousands of miles driving around the state, everything's great. It's just when you're trying to go over the mountain pass that we were starting to have issues. If this had been an original 67 Shelby, then the troubleshooting would have been a lot different, right? A carbureted engine versus this one actually has a modern fuel injection and everything. So I had packed a snap-on scanner and we plugged into the car just to see if there's any codes, and it did have one code, which was a fuel delivery error. So we started the car back up and everything was running fine, and I still had the scanner on it. I was looking through, all the data seemed like it was looking normal. Because it had that fuel delivery code, we suspected maybe it was a fuel pump problem. So we were gonna go back to the last town, try to find a fuel pump, change it in the Shelby, in the parking lot, and then we would catch up with everybody in Crested Butte, which was our next stop for the trip. We meet up with the group, we take the group photo, and then we head back to the last town. When we meet up with the customer, he gets out of the car and tells me that the car's running great again. There's no fuel delivery errors, he has full power, he can go full throttle, the car drives perfect again. So we decide maybe it was just a fluke, let's clear the codes, and let's try it again, instead of changing the fuel pump in the parking lot. So we attempt to go up the pass the second time, and everything's going great. We're carrying good speed. We're getting more epic footage of the car, just taking advantage of having only that car with us because now we're broken away from the group. And so we're getting awesome footage of the car, and at about the same exact spot, the car pulls over again, hazard lights on. And something is definitely wrong with the car. We pulled over again, and we're checking out the car again, and none of it's making any sense. When I put the scanner onto the car, the fuel pressures all look like they were supposed to be. It was around 70 PSI for the pump that comes out of the tank, and a few hundred PSI on the rail like it's supposed to be for the high pressure side of the engine. It doesn't look like there's a fuel delivery error. We're looking under the car, we're checking in the trunk, we don't see any leaks. It doesn't seem like there's actually a fuel delivery error. So at this point, it seems like it's an issue with the computer. So we disconnect the battery to kind of hard reset everything. We disconnect the battery for a couple minutes, we connect it back, the car starts up and everything drives normal. We go up the mountain, we make it 1 to 2 minutes, the car pulls over again. Disconnect the battery again, that's all we're doing at this point. We disconnect the battery, let everything kind of reset, we reconnect, the car can drive for another 2 minutes up the mountain. At this point, it seems like it's something wrong with a computer, so maybe it's a sensor or something is wrong, but it's a computer problem. So changing the fuel pump out, we kind of rule that out as a possibility. changing the fuel pump out isn't going to fix a computer problem. So we decide to just kind of limp it up and over the mountain. Once we get to the summit and we're going downhill, obviously the car can just coast. Once we get off the mountain and back into Crested Butte, the car's driving perfectly fine again. It's got full power, he can go wide open throttle, shifting, everything's working normal. No problem on either side of the mountain pass. We're only experiencing the problem on the mountain. We called Revology. To their credit, they called us back within minutes, and it was, you know, they're in Florida, so they're a couple hours ahead of us. It was like 8:30 p.m. on a Friday night for them, and they called us right back. So we're in the hotel, the parking garage in Crested Butte. We have the top guys at Revology on the phone helping us troubleshoot the problem like right then and there. So incredible customer service from Revology. They did mention that they have heard of customers having issues with this engine and this computer at higher elevations. That kind of checks out with what we had been experiencing, right? No problems down off the mountain, only having an issue up at higher elevation. The whole point of going on the Shelby Rally is to go over mountain pass after mountain pass after mountain pass after mountain pass. The customer decides to go home early, avoiding mountain passes, and I heard that they made it without any problems. The car never lost power. They never had any issues. You know, about 2 months go by, and the car comes into the shop. We check the tune. We drive it around town. The tuner thinks he can make a couple of improvements, which is what we expect. So he makes a couple of improvements, and over a few days, we get a couple of revisions, and then the tuner says, everything looks good, let's test it out. Trying to think of how can we test high elevation without driving all the way back out to that pass where the car was originally breaking down. Like 20 minutes from the shop is the entry point to the Pikes Peak Highway. Pikes Peak goes up to 14,100 and something feet, so we thought that would be an excellent opportunity for us to make sure this car can handle high elevation. So filling up, and today we're gonna go all the way up there. So we were checking the altimeter as we were driving up Pikes Peak. Current elevation, according to my watch, is about 8,600 feet. We think that the trouble spot is somewhere between 10 and 12,000 feet. And 10,000 feet, everything's great. 12,000 feet, everything's great. And we're getting close to the point where we were on Cottonwood Pass. We get to 12,200, 12,500 feet. The car's still doing perfect. So we fixed the problem. All right, we start rolling, and fuel trims are like 65% adding fuel. So probably what was happening, and we actually might be experiencing the issue right now, we just haven't lost power, because the code that was popping up was for a fuel delivery error. And if it's not delivering enough fuel, it's going to be reading that it's lean, and it's going to be adding in a lot of fuel. It says it's adding 65% fuel. All right, I'm going to make a judgment call and pull over here. There's our issue. Yeah, we're having the issue right here, right now. All right, this is the issue. So we weren't sure at this point, is it a tune problem still? And now that we're at elevation, maybe the tuner is going to be able to see something different. So we'd been recording all of this. Where we broke down, I actually had a little bit of cell phone service. So I was able to hotspot in and send the recording to the tuner. He texts me back and says, everything looks awesome, except I can see that you're losing fuel pressure. We're trying to figure out how elevation is causing us to lose fuel pressure if it's not a tuning problem. So maybe it's the fuel cap. All right, we're gonna take the fuel cap off, and we're gonna drive this next stretch without it. Smelly. It has a ripped seal. I don't know that it's the seal is ripped. I don't know that it's sealing enough to hold a good vacuum. You can see that. So we're going to be replacing that when we get back to the shop. But all right, we're ready to give it another try. First in line. Here we go, full throttle. Seemed like we didn't have an issue until we stopped and idled. So my plan is to not stop and idle until we get to the summit. Right, we're starting at like that 13,200 feet. We have about another 1,000 feet of elevation to go before the summit. And so we pull out and full throttle multiple times, all the way to the top of the hill. They definitely could hear us coming, right? The car sounds good. It's really loud. And we were just full throttle up the hill, making sure that it had power, making sure there's no fuel delivery error. Like, how can you have a problem with fuel delivery if you're able to go full speed up Pikes Peak, full speed up a mountain? Well, we're able to make it to the summit. Everything's great. We think that we've solved the problem. Somehow the fuel cap was stopping fuel from getting to the motor. So we have the fuel cap off, able to go to the summit. Everything's great. We decide we've already come this far. We already made the reservation to drive up Pikes Peak and everything. Let's go down to 10,000 feet and then turn around and do it again and drive up the second time. So everything's great. We make it down to 10,000 feet. Yeah, what was my score?
127.
Fantastic.
Great car.
Thanks. We'll be back through in a minute. Alright, we're at 12,900 feet. No fuel delivery issues so far. Oh, there it is. Nope, it's doing it. We're at 12,900 and it's doing it. Just went into fail-safe mode. We got to make it up and over this hill. Like, we've lost power. And we have a nice parking spot. Jeez, talk about getting lucky twice in a row. So I'm parked on the side of this hill, and I'm reviewing the logs, and I can see that the fuel pressure now is dropping out on the low side. So from out of the tank to the motor, I can see that fuel pressure is dropping out. So we know it's not the fuel cap to blame. We decide to let it sit for a couple of minutes. Now the theory is that there's something wrong with the fuel pump. The fuel pump is getting hot, or maybe it has a fuel pump driver module. Something is getting hot, and that fuel pump is no longer delivering fuel. We let it sit for a couple of minutes. I start the car. Everything's great. I'm looking at the fuel pressures. All the pressures are great. We pull back out, and we try to make it up to the top of the hill. So I'm going to try to drive this gingerly to the top, minimizing the demand that I put on the fuel pump. Oops, 8 psi, 10 psi. Gotta make it to the top of this hill. It's not gonna do it. All right, well, we're pulling over on a real cliff now. This one warrants the hazard lights. So now we're just sitting in our lane in the middle of this long stretch, and it's just a sheer drop off on the passenger side. And stop logging. This is fun. Fortunately, there's not any uphill traffic at the moment. And the car won't run, and I'm letting it crank and crank and crank, and it won't run. Well, it's kind of sketchy, but we are going to go downhill in this lane with no power steering. And no power brakes. That's important to note. I just rolled the car very slowly down our lane backwards, going the wrong direction. The traffic's coming down the hill and going past us, and everyone's looking at us like we're insane. And there's just this sheer drop-off to the right, and I have no power brakes or power steering. And I just kind of roll backwards until I can get into that little spot where we had just been sitting. We sit there for a few minutes and trying to let everything cool down, and we start the car, and I can see the fuel pressures are good, and we wait for uphill and downhill traffic to clear out, and then I went backwards into the road and then got turned around and pointed downhill, and we were able to make it back to the shop without any other problems. And I got it. The fuel pump that I wanted to put in the car, I couldn't get one locally. So we had to order it online. So it was going to take a few days, but that gave us time to get the trunk taken apart and gain access to where the fuel pump goes into the tank. The new fuel pump came in. I got them swapped out. So I booked tickets to drive up Pikes Peak again. This time, we have all of the recording stuff happening on the laptop. I'm watching the elevation on my watch. We go all the way to the top without any problems. But I didn't have very many opportunities to go full throttle because on that day there just happened to be a lot of traffic, a lot of people driving up, so I was having to go really slow. So we make it to the top, we get our Pikes Peak donut. We go back down to 10,000 feet and like, let's try this again, and let's try to pick a time where the traffic is a little bit less. There seems to be a really nice open stretch of traffic, so we get into there, and this time we're able to do several wide open throttle pulls all the way to the summit without any problems. Now the tune is great, and now it's getting the fuel that it needs. So that is actually what solved the problem. It needed a fuel pump. Typically when a fuel pump fails, that's it. You know, it's something internal, like it's not holding its seal, it's not building pressure, whatever it is. But typically when a fuel pump fails, it's just done. It won't suddenly come back and then fail, and then suddenly come back and then fail. The huge bummer of this whole story is that when the car broke down originally back in June, we had decided it needs a fuel pump. Let's go back to the last town, let's get a fuel pump, let's change it, and continue on the rally. And if we had just stuck with that, the customer could have done the entire rally instead of going home early. They wouldn't have had to deal with the logistics of bringing the 2.5 hours back to me. It just would have been solved right then and there. I think the moral of the story here is to stick with your gut. If we had just changed out the fuel pump as originally planned, none of this would have ever happened.